in relation to...
In relation to how Māori are perceived in the mental health system.
Well, you don't have to go into any kind of media, really, and any chance that you see Māori or Pacific, it's normally male, aged 20 to 30 years old, running out some shop. Because that's how, whenever I watch something like Crime Watch, for example, that's often your stories, right? So you have to get your Māori and your Pacific population groups. I think for me, when I was reflecting on this movie, which is the third time I've seen it, I was somewhat relieved that it wasn't a Once Were Warriors situation where you have the trauma and the stigma of Māori being portrayed as being incredibly violent and drunk and always, speeding up on either methamphetamine or cannabis. I think with this particular one, I think there was a good balance, really, of understanding some kind of Māori tikanga and just kind of understanding the shift, because because Māori are the minority group. I thought it was quite good storytelling to see the shift between the dominant culture and Māori culture, and seeing Arthur being able to try to work his way between those different worldviews, and I don't think that's often reflected very much in the media, in a positive way anyway.
I think that one of the things that I think that the New Zealand system has actually benefited hugely from tikanga Māori is actually you're able to talk to your ancestors over here, and sometimes it gets confusing as to whether you're talking to someone, if you're Pākehā, you're talking to someone who's, it's madness, and over here it's ancestors, but we've managed to actually slip that up a bit. And I think a lot of other countries really are quite intrigued by that. And I think that's one of our real advantages, but that's my own view, not anyone else's. Look, how do you think the media, do you think the media does have a responsibility? And we've talked about film media here, but we'll also always read about print media because they get it all the time. Do you think they do have a responsibility to destigmatise or talk clean about mental health?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. This is just in case I don't get another chance to say anything. But, and I guess it kind of gives me a little bit of an entree to talk about the research that we did at the Centre for Mental Health Research at the University of Auckland in 2009. We did this study where we sampled print and news media, electronic as well as print. We didn't get a lot of samples of electronic, it was a little bit harder, but we got 3,500 examples, and then we looked at how well does the media comply with the Ministry of Health's guidelines. Overall, we found that the media did a reasonable job, but we did also find within that sample some quite egregious examples of where a particular personality, that was one thing we looked at quite closely, or event was used as a kind of a hook on which to frame a story that might be quite out of proportion with what a more balanced perspective would provide. So, obviously the media want to tell news stories. They want people to look at the front page of the Herald, for example, and say, I want to buy that, I want to read it, etc. So they do have this kind of focus on, what will make an engaging story. And so we found some examples like that. I guess what we found overall was that we felt that the media were reasonably balanced, which is not to say that more couldn't be done. I'll just give you one example, then I'll pass on to somebody else. Over the period that we were doing this research, the media were aware that we were doing it, so they were very interested in what we might have to say. And in particular, what they wanted to do was they wanted to push an argument that said that they should not be restrained from reporting, in particular, suicides. That was the issue that we were looking at. The international evidence is quite clear that the way in which suicides are reported in the media can have a modelling effect and can lead to copycat suicides, particularly with younger people, and as you know we have a high rate of youth suicide in New Zealand. So there is this kind of imperative to think carefully about how that's done, which is why the Coroner's Act is structured to kind of manage that, and also why the Ministry have guidelines to do it. But over the period of the research, I noticed that the media ran a lot of stories about why is it taboo to talk about suicide. Well, actually, it's not taboo to talk about suicide. It never was. The Coroner's Act doesn't prevent it. What it needs is the media to engage with that in a kind of a reasonable and meaningful way. During this period of our study, there were a number of items on the radio in which news journalists were saying we need to take those restrictions out. But during the same period of time, the Christchurch Press did a very good, comprehensive background story about somebody who happened to have died by suicide, but the suicide wasn't the hook for the story. It was the person and their life and the way they managed their difficulties, etc. And it was a very human story, a very good example of reporting. And to me, it demonstrated that, yes, the media can have a positive role in relation to mental health by telling stories that aren't sort of linked to a specific event or to something dramatic, but which are very human stories and that people will find engaging. So they did that, and to me it demonstrated that they really didn't need any greater freedom. What they needed was to use the skills they have to write good stories and engage people. So I'll pass on from there.
Yeah, to answer the question, the media does have a responsibility in all things it reports on. It has a responsibility to provide information, it has a responsibility to provide the facts, it has a responsibility to inform and entertain the readership or listenership or viewership. It does not have a responsibility to tell you what to think, although it attempts to on a regular basis. I think that when it comes to reporting suicide, the media can't be trusted because it's forever wanting to push boundaries. And pushing boundaries is a great thing, but pushing boundaries where the lives of individuals hang in the balance is a very dangerous thing indeed. I don't believe in open slather reporting of suicide. And at the moment, you can talk about suicide as we were talking about before. We can talk about suicide in the media in a very robust kind of way. It's a matter of simply reporting the individual stories that have to be told. The media screws that and says we're not allowed to talk it at all. And that's the great lie. And the problem I have is if that great lie becomes ingrained, we're going to see a dramatic shift.
So from my perspective, to answer your question, yes, the media has a responsibility, but like any worldview, it depends on what the dominant worldview is, right? So the dominant worldview is New Zealand European, and I warmly encourage you to watch both, say, TV1 News or TV3 News, and then compare it to something like Te Karere or Māori TV, and what you'll often get is one story but told in completely separate ways. So as a brief example, if you look at the Treaty of Waitangi, the event, now most people tend to cringe and think you're going to often get some kind of activist, you're probably going to get someone who's quite woolly looking, someone who, you know, for all intents and purposes, the media want to portray someone who looks as though, you know, crazy, slightly unwell, and I don't know about you, but I warmly encourage you to go up there because you might only find like one person up in Waitangi who's doing, you know, particular grievance. And that's how it's portrayed on, say, TV1 or TV3 News. However, if you look at Māori News or Te Karere, what you see is the families enjoying themselves, they're having fun. So when you look at it from a media's perspective, I think you need to kind of go one step deeper and ask, well, when you talk about media, who are you looking at it from? Are you looking at it from an Indigenous worldview, or are you looking at it from a Tauiwi or other worldview?
This thing about stigma and language, I mean, the mental health system to me complicates itself out of all proportion of life and how it describes what it does, you know. I mean, you say, well, what do you do? Well, actually, I provide services for blah, 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 blah. You know, I mean, people just don't say what they do. They kind of like misty word it, and we use words like consumer. You say to most people in New Zealand, what's a consumer? It's a person doing shopping. You know, so and that's what was the language we were supposed to use. So, stay with that thing about words and language, because it seems to me as people who work in the mental health or people who experience mental health, we growl at everybody and when they use the wrong words, and so yeah, it's going to put them off, isn't it?
Words can be stigmatising. I am a consumer myself or a service user or a patient or someone who is in the grip of the mental health services and have been so for the last more or less 10 years, been a severe case of illness on a number of occasions. I've been in seclusion a number of occasions, and my background, I guess, in talking about the media and mental health is informed by my inclusion in that mental health sector. Of course, words are important, and stigmatising can be stigmatising. I want to refer to an article I pulled out of one of the papers yesterday. It was a New Zealand Herald paper talking about a case where the insanity plea was used successfully. The opening line was, "So-and-so has managed to escape conviction for a heinous crime." Now, the body of the story went through that he poured boiling water over the victim and killed the victim and this sort of stuff, and that he got away with it. The fact is, he didn't get away with it. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity, which in itself is a conviction. You're sent to the Mason Clinic or some other forensic clinic where you have to do certain things, and therapy, and you can talk more on that than I can. You have to do certain things, you have to jump through certain hoops, and I think this gentleman happened to spend 3 or 4 years in the Mason Clinic. But the idea of the story is that here is a person that has not got justice, and the family has not got justice. And I think the skew of the story is that these people are to be feared, they are to be worried about, they are smart and conniving because they can use the insanity plea. No one else can use the insanity plea. You've got rid of provocation, so that doesn't work anymore. So it is stigmatising, not just for those people